here's what I want you to know, all right? We need to talk about this. It's important that we talk about this. And we're going to choose our words carefully, but if you got a little kid in the room, now's the time to check out Epic Kids, all right? And we'll continue on together in here as adults in middle school and above. So as we wrap up this series, we are going to talk about this area that our culture will not stop talking about. But before we dive in, I want to say welcome to those of you joining us online or in Dixon City or in Wilkes-Barre. I hope you enjoy this as much as we have. This series has been great. And so if you've missed any of them, let me encourage you to go back, check them out. You can actually look on the Parker Hill app. You can watch or listen there, and you can share them with your friends. Now, this is a huge topic, isn't it? And there's no way that I'm going to be able to cover it in one talk. So here's what I want to do. I want to focus on one area. I just want to talk about the biggest thing that our culture is saying about this subject. And our culture has this one prevailing message that they're pushing through advertising, through media, through movies, through most of the content that we are consuming. And their one big idea about how all of this is supposed to work, their one big idea about sex is this: go ahead. Go ahead, as long as you're not hurting anyone. Go ahead as long as you're not hurting anyone. If you find someone who's willing, all right, and you're willing, then go ahead and just proceed. And our culture is looking at this question and they're about what we should do in the area of our sexuality, and they're saying, hey, it's no big deal. And why is it no big deal? Well, here's the conclusion that our culture has reached. They're saying, it's just a physical activity. Sex is just a physical activity, so it's just no big deal. It's a physical need, just like you need to eat or you need to sleep or you need to work out, but maybe you don't do that one. Sex is just one more of those things that your body needs, and so you participate in it. So what do you do if you're hungry? You eat something. And what do you do if you're tired? You get some sleep. And what do you do if you have a desire for intimacy? Well, you find someone else who's willing and you make love. Because sex is just a physical activity. It's probably better than food or sleep, but it's just an activity. And our culture concludes that if this is true, then the church just needs to shut up, right? The church just needs to cut it out. We wouldn't feel guilty about any of this stuff if the church if they would just stop putting all these rules around it and restrictions and putting boundaries around this thing. In fact, they conclude that if the church would just shut up, we'd be free to enjoy ourselves and have the best experience with sex. And God, with all of his boundaries around this area in our lives, he's just like this father who doesn't get it. He's a murderer of love. He's this cosmic killjoy. And if he would just back off, then we would be able to enjoy the fun that is to be had. Because, hey, sex is just a physical activity, which is why apps like Tinder exist. According to their own website, Tinder empowers users around the world to create connections that otherwise might never have been possible. Sounds really nice. Now, the way that this app works is you download it, and you set up a profile, and then immediately you get to see these pictures of other people who are also looking for a connection. They're kind of like baseball cards. It's a face with a little bit of information underneath, and you can start flipping through this app trying to find a connection. And here's what you do. If you swipe to the left, it's a no, I'm not interested. And so that goes in the non-interested pile. And as you're flipping through these things, if you swipe to the right, you're saying, I am interested. Let's see how this works. And if you swipe right on someone saying, I'm interested, and they swipe right on you saying they're interested, then you can talk, you can set up a date, you can, do whatever. And so far, Tinder has facilitated through this system 20 billion matches in 190 countries, 1.6 billion swipes per day on the Tinder app, 26 million matches happen per day, and 1.5 million dates are happening per week through Tinder. But people aren't just using Tinder to set up a date. They're using it to hook up afterward, too. In fact, for many, the goal of using Tinder is sex, which is no big deal, right? Because hooking up with someone it's just a physical thing. But is it really? Vanity Fair, of all places, wrote an eye-opening piece on Tinder. And here's what people who use Tinder are saying. First, let's talk from the guy's perspective. One guy said this, "It's like ordering Seamless," says Drew, another investment banker, referring to the online delivery service. But instead of ordering food, you're ordering a person. The reporter says that none of the guys she spoke to want to be in a relationship. "I don't want one," says Nick. "I don't want to have to deal with all that stuff." Brian says, "You can't be selfish in a relationship. It feels good just to do what I want." So this is what we call the hookup culture. You find someone, you get physical, and then you disappear. Women in the article had this to say, that there is no dating. There's no relationship, says Amanda, a senior at Boston College. They're rare. You can have a fling that lasts like 7, 8 months, and you could never actually call someone your boyfriend. Hooking up is a lot easier. No one gets hurt. Well, not on the surface. One of Amanda's friends chimes in, sex should stem from emotional intimacy. It should come from somewhere else, but it's the opposite with us right now. And I think it's really kind of destroying females' self-images. Okay, so maybe it's more than just a physical thing. So here's the deal. I grew up with this idea, and as soon as I say it, it's gonna sound archaic in our modern times. But I grew up with this idea that sex was just for married people. It's like crazy, right? That sex is just for married people. So I grew up thinking that, and so when I went through the years where I was most tempted, starting out, going through puberty, and then into high school, I started putting some boundaries in my life to avoid going places that are only for, married people. And when I started dating my wife, we kind of set some things in place so that we would save things that are for marriage. And eventually, one day we got married and we got to look across at each other at the altar and say to each other, "I will be faithful to you." And we trusted each other because we'd already been practicing faithfulness. It's crazy, right? This whole idea that sex is just for married people. And I know for a lot of you, I just lost you right there. I lost you, right? Because that's exactly the opposite of what our culture is screaming at us. Because no one really believes today that sex is just for married people, do they? I mean, really? Because sex is just this physical act. A special one maybe, but not something that you have to reserve for one person. And so to get to the bottom of this in your own life, let's just ask one question. And I don't want you to answer this question out loud. I just want you to think about it and think honestly. And here's the question. Has sex outside of marriage made your life better or more complicated? Has sex outside of marriage made your life better or more complicated? Come on, let's just be honest here, right? Better or more complicated? Let's broaden this a little bit and say, has sex or any sexual activity outside of marriage made your life better or more complicated? And let's think past like the moment it happens and an hour later or a day later, maybe years later, and answer this question. Has the pornography or the sex message or the hidden Instagram or Snapchat account or the affair or the fantasies or getting drunk and getting naked or living together and sleeping together, or has it made your life better or more complicated? I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being sincere. We got to think about this. Did it make your life better or did it make it worse? Did it make you a better man or a better woman, or did it bring you shame? Did it make you feel more alive, or has it led to you feeling more numb? Do you feel prized or do you feel used? Do you end up as a better father or mother or friend? Does it make you more happy or does it make you more sad? Does it make you more complete or less complete? See, has sex outside of marriage or any sexual activity outside of how God designed it made your life better, or has it made it more complicated? Strange, isn't it? That with all of our sexual freedom, we end up not with more happiness, but with less. We end up with more complicated lives, more baggage and more brokenness. And culture, they're not gonna stop spinning the story that this is just a physical thing. And they won't stop claiming that God is a cosmic killjoy who's just out there to murder love and ruin all the fun. But can't we just admit right now together that what our culture is selling isn't working? It's messing up our lives. And you know it, and I know it. Even without looking at the Bible, we know it, that there's more to sex than the physical. There's more to it than satisfying an appetite. We know it is so much more, and so it should be treated with care. Now, there's a letter written thousands of years ago in ancient times that tells us why. So we're going to dive in there. It's part of the Bible. And the funny thing is, the questions and the comments and the conversations they were having back then, we're still having those same ones today. And so come with me in your Bible or your Bible app to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 12 through 20. And this is a part of the Bible that's really a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church that he started in Corinth. And Corinth was known for being wild and unrestrained with their appetites. And so the church at Corinth was tempted to do exactly what their culture was doing, just like we're tempted to do exactly what our culture is doing. So Paul heard how this church was handling this issue, and he writes to them to talk to them very clearly about this topic. And so let's jump in verse 12, where he says this. It says, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything's beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. See, that's a quote. They were taking Paul's statement and made it into a motto of how they were going to live, and they were using it to justify how they were living. Now, Paul had taught them that they no longer had to follow the Old Testament laws, in particular those ceremonial laws about what you eat and certain days of the week and all that kind of stuff. And he had taught them that those things didn't apply anymore. He taught them that Christ had fulfilled the law, and he had replaced it with a new system. And that new system was one based on the highest virtue, the virtue of love. And so Paul called this the law of Christ. So Paul went through great lengths to clarify to the church at Corinth that no, what you do does not earn you a favor with God, that you cannot live up to the law. In fact, the law has been kind of pushed away, and something else has come in its place, the new covenant. And as Christians, we are free from the law, which is really great news. But the thing is, they had started taking Paul's statement that they're free, and they had kind of twisted it, and they were using it in ways that he did not intend. And so they took them out of context, and they applied them to where they wanted to apply them. But it really ended up landing, their decisions ended up landing far from where Paul intended them to land. That's not what he meant. And so the first thing that we learn about intimacy is this, is that intimacy is powerful. It's powerful. Paul's saying, hold on. It's not just anything goes here. This is a powerful thing in your life. It can be beneficial or it can be harmful. What you do with this area of your life can determine so much about your life and your relationships because it's powerful. It's powerful because it can benefit us and send us in a certain direction that is great. Or it can send us in another direction by mastering us. It can quickly control you and take you places you do not want to go. Which means that there's a more important question here than, will God forgive this, or can I get away with this? We should be asking, will I regret this? Or will this take me where I want to go in life? You've heard this before, but intimacy is like a fire. And some of my favorite moments in life were in a backyard with my friends around a campfire. And we'd swap stories, and we'd roast s'mores, and we'd laugh until late in the evening. And those are some of the most prized moments in my life. But just a few years ago, I went out to Colorado for my friend's wedding, and while we were there, they had been experiencing like a long season of drought. And so while we were there, fires were breaking out in different parts of the state. And it was so bad they were shutting down national parks, and they were evacuating people out of their homes, and whole neighborhoods were being burned down because of the fire. And see, intimacy is like a fire. Inside of the fire ring, it's a good thing. Outside and out of control, it's a terrible thing. Inside, it brings light and it brings heat and it's a source of joy, but outside, it brings destruction and death because sex is powerful. It's powerful. It's a powerful force for good in our relationships when it brings a married couple even closer together. It's a powerful force for pain when it's used outside of marriage. So no, it's not just physical. I don't think so. Paul's saying it's not. It's powerful, but it's more than that. Let's look at what Paul says next in verse 13. He said, you say food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality. So the whole food thing sounds really interesting. We've heard that before, right? It's just an appetite. Just an appetite, right? But he's saying, no. It's not. It doesn't work like that. It's not just an appetite. Now let's pause for a second. Let's just find this word because we don't use this every day in your normal conversations. You haven't said this recently, have you? Right? Sexual immorality, okay? What is he talking about? Well, sexual immorality is in the Bible is any sex or sexual activity. It's sex or sensual activity outside of marriage. And so it includes all of those things that fall outside of those boundaries. In other words, it's any time that you are lighting a fire outside of God's boundaries. So if you look at it or you think about or flirt with or do something with someone who is not your spouse, all of that's sexual immorality. Now let's keep reading. It says this, the body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And by his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Meant. That's an interesting word for Paul to use here. Why is he saying meant? Because meant implies purpose, and it implies design. Paul is reminding us that God invented sex. That God liked the idea of this incredibly bonding that can happen through intimacy. God designed it. So is God a killjoy? Well, it seems strange to me to accuse the person who invented one of the most pleasurable human experiences of being a prude. Doesn't make sense. That's like saying the person that invented the chocolate candy bar probably hates sweets. Not likely. So notice that what Paul is saying is that we have been given a precious gift from God that he designed and has given to us. And just like you don't take your car and make it a boat, you don't take your boat and try to make it a car because it goes against its design, we're not supposed to use our bodies in a way that goes against God's design. Because what we do with our bodies is powerful. It affects the life that we have now and affects lives for eternity. Not only is it powerful, look at what he says in verse 15. He says, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. So not only is sex powerful, but it's also spiritual. It is mysteriously spiritual. Paul says it's spiritual in at least two ways here. The first is that as Christians, when you become a Christian, you become united with God. And so God is with us every day, all the time. He's not just way out there, he's right here with us, which is one of the most amazing truths about being a Christian, that God is with us. That's why Paul says in verse 17, but whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. So Paul says every time you do something immoral, you're taking God along for the ride. And of course, we don't want to drag God into immoral activity, into sins, because God is holy and we want to be like him and we want to be holy too. So that's the first way that it's spiritual, but there's another way that it's spiritual. Verse 16 says this, do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. See, another way that it's spiritual, it's mysteriously transcendent, is that when two people are sexually intimate, they are bonded together on a deep level. Science tells us that during sex, the brain releases oxytocin, which causes this special connection, a bonding on a deep level. And God hardwired it to work that way, and that's what Paul is talking about in verse 16. The word unites here means to bring together, to cling, to glue, to cement. In essence, it means to fuse together so that the two separate parts are now indistinguishable and they're combined into one. And that's what happens when two people are intimate. Now think of the benefits of that inside of a marriage. You share life, you share purpose and belonging and joy with one another. The two become one. It's a very powerful reality. It makes me think of custom glass blowing. And so when I lived in New York, my wife and I visited the Corning Museum of Glass. And we watched a demonstration of glass blowing. And it was amazing to see artists take this molten glass and form it into these amazing sculptures. And so I learned that one of the ways that you make a vase that has two colors in it, like this one, is to take one color and then add another, and while they're both soft and malleable, and put them together into the furnace and work them together until they both become fused together. Now you can't totally tell, but this is actually a couple of colors put together, but now it just looks blue because they've become one color as mixing together. There was a clear glass and there was a blue glass, and now it looks like this. So that's what happens when two become one. This is a picture of what happens when there is intimacy in a relationship. The two separate things that were beforehand distinguishable now become indistinguishable. They become fused together. They become one. They become united. And that's why Paul says, did you not know? Like, this is a big, special thing. I just want you to make sure that you understand it. Did you not know? Don't miss this, because it's a big deal. Sex is not just physical. It's so much more than that. It is spiritual when the two become one, which means that sleeping around becomes a real problem, because instead of the two becoming one and staying one and walking together as one, the two become one, and then they try to undo that bond. We try to unglue ourselves. We try to uncement ourselves. We try to unfuse ourselves, which, of course, cannot happen without collateral damage. And so if this is the relationship and the two have now become one, if what before was distinguishable but now it's indistinguishable, what happens when you decide to take that relationship and pull it apart, when you decide to take this relationship and you no longer keep it together within the bonds of marriage, or you didn't have it there in the first place, you know what happens? There's collateral damage. You see the problem right away, don't you? When we're bonded together in intimacy, but then we try to break apart. It doesn't work. And it costs us. It fractures our souls. It messes with us emotionally and spiritually and relationally, because you can't get the individual parts back without some form of collateral damage. And these breakups, they leave us jagged and messed up. And we carry these things with us throughout our lives as a painful mess, because we cannot just tear apart what has been fused together without feeling the effects. For some of you here today, this is exactly how you feel, because you have made some decisions that have led down a road and now you feel broken. And this is a painful place to be. Sex is certainly more than physical. It's powerful and it's spiritual. But there's one last thing. Paul goes on to say this in verse 18. He says, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body. Whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Paul says, intimacy is not only powerful and spiritual, it is deeply personal. It is so powerful and it is so spiritual that it leaves an imprint on our person. And so when we handle it with care, it's one of the most beautiful expressions of human existence. And when we don't handle it with care, it's one of the most devastating experiences. And it can leave scars long after the moment has passed. See, Paul warns us that this sin is not like other sins in our lives. He's not saying it's actually a worse sin. That's not his point. His point is that this sin, when we commit it, is a sin on a deep level against other people, against God, against ourselves. That every time when we commit this sin, we're taking an axe to the tree of our souls, and it's hurting us. And you might carry the scars of playing with this fire in your life. And so you're numb, or you're addicted, or you're ashamed, or you feel worthless, used, and dirty. There's so many scars. And some were because of your decisions, but maybe you have some of these scars because of someone else's decisions. But it doesn't just go away. It's intensely personal. And our claims that it's all just physical, it's all physical and we can do whatever we want, that's all physical and we're free to just act however we would like, just doesn't ring true, does it? Our bravado is hollow. We try to kid ourselves by saying it's just physical, or we're just getting experience, or we'll stop looking at stuff once we get married, or that it's love, so why not? Or we're just modern people, and so we don't have to worry about all those old ideas. But this isn't just some religious thing. It's a reality thing, and we know it. You know, two of Hollywood's favorite actors, Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence, they recently starred in a movie called Passengers. And while Jennifer Lawrence was being interviewed at a round table, the interviewer said, tell me, what's the most difficult moment for you as an actress? What's been the hardest part of being an actress? And she said in reply, talking about Passengers, I had my first real sex scene. It was really bizarre. It was really weird. It was done right. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just a bizarre experience. The reporter then asked, well, how do you prepare for that? You drink. I got really, really drunk. But that led to more anxiety when I got home because I thought, what have I done? I don't know. And it was going to be my first time kissing a married man, and guilt is like the worst feeling in your stomach. And I knew it was my job, but I couldn't tell my stomach that. And so I called my mom and said, will you just tell me that it's okay? And she concludes by saying, it was just very vulnerable. Did you catch that? I appreciate her honesty. She says, guilt is like the worst feeling in your stomach, and I knew it was my job, but I couldn't tell my stomach that, so I called my mom and said, will you just tell me that it's okay? Okay, hold up, time out, right? What is the big deal with this sex scene? Right? Hollywood is saying that it's just pretend sex, and it's just physical. Why should it matter? It's just your job, Jennifer Lawrence, just do your job. But something else is happening here, right? I mean, they don't talk this way about fight scenes where they kill people and go home and feel moral quandaries about it. But somehow they feel it here. Why? Because it's so much more than physical. Intimacy is powerful, and it's spiritual, and it's deeply personal, which is why the best sex is inside God's boundaries, and the worst scars come from sexual immorality. So what do we do? What do we do? Well, Paul tells us in the last two verses. He says this in verse 19, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. And so he tells us, honor God with your bodies. Follow the sexual ethic of Jesus, the teachings of the Bible. Do it his way, as he has designed it. We know that when we misuse it, it wreaks havoc on our lives. And so he's saying, in closing, I just want to talk to the people about, a few different people in the room, about honoring God with your bodies. And so there's some of you in the room today who have not yet made decisions about this yet. You're like making decisions. It's like coming up in your life, like the students in the room. And here's what I want to say to you. Don't flirt with disaster. Like Paul said, flee. Like run away. Run as far away as you can from temptation and run toward a better future with a spouse. Set your sights on something better for you and your future spouse. Imagine the day when you get to meet this person, and then along the lines in this dating relationship, you get to that point where you got to be honest about your past, because you can't have a relationship built on a lack of trust. So at some point, you got to open up about past relationships or what's going on in your life, and you open up to them, and you get to say to them, I've saved myself for you. Imagine a day when you're standing at an altar and you get to look across and you get to know that you can trust that person because they have shown themselves to be trustworthy. flee and run towards something better. Because here's the deal. It's powerful, and it's spiritual, and it's personal. And so I want you to say, I want the awesome version of that instead of the awful version of that. So for those of you about to make a decision, set your sights on God's best and go God's ways. And aside to parents, I just want to say to you that I just want to get really practical. You need to talk about this. You need to do it often and regular and early in their life. Just make it a normal part of their life. Teach your boys that when that woman shows up on the screen and she's not wearing very much, teach your boys to look away because she needs some privacy. Teach your girls that their value does not come from the attention of boys, but from being a daughter of the King. And you're thinking, wow, how in the world do I instill this in kids? Well, there's 100 suggestions I can give you, but I'll just give you this one. Partner with the church. Partner with the church. Parents, this is too big for you to try to tackle alone in the lives of your students. And our student ministries just hit it out of the park last month with a series all about moral boundaries. And so, if you want help with this, you need to partner with them. Our student pastors went toe-to-toe with the lies that your students are being fed all the time, and they fought for the heart of your kids. And here's what I want to say. Get in on that. Take your kids there. And if they're already there, check out the messages online and start having conversations with them. This is too important for you to avoid because it's awkward, and you won't regret it. Those are people that are coming up on making this decision. What about the people in the middle of it? The people that are playing with fire right now. People that are making these decisions. You're living together and sleeping together, but you're not married. You may be going through one bad relationship after another. You might be glued to a screen. You might be trying to figure out how you can set up a secret meeting with someone at a motel somewhere. For those of you in the middle of this, please listen. Your way is hurting you, and it's going to hurt others. It's going to hurt any future relationships that you could have. And I know it sounds crazy, but I think it's time for us to admit that the way the world is saying to do this, it's not going to work. And so I want to encourage you to trust God. And here's what I want to encourage you to do. It might sound nuts to you, but for some of you, this is a turning point in your life. I want to challenge you to take on the 1-year challenge. The 1-year challenge is where you pause the way that you've been handling this area of your life for 1 year and you give it a try. You give God's way a try and you see how it turns out. And see if the numbness doesn't fade, see if your sanity doesn't return, see if your relationships don't get better, see if your ability to connect with others is not increased, see if that commitment doesn't strengthen your relationships. And so, no, really, I'm saying try this 1-year challenge. Because here's the thing. Whatever you choose, it becomes part of your story. What story do you want to tell? Andy Stanley put it this way recently when he said this. He said, when this is just a story you tell, what story do you want to tell? And so when you look back on this season of your life, when this is just a story that you tell, what story do you want to tell? And so this could be the week for you where all of this changes. When you make a change, when you start a new story, and the story that you tell is to your future spouse or to your current spouse and to your kids or to your grandkids is about this day, about this change, about when things turn around for you by God's grace. And the last group I want to talk to are those who have scars from your decisions that you have made in the past. It might be years ago, it might have been last night. But for those of you with regrets who listened to this talk and said, that's painful because I'm going through that, you listened to this talk and you said, I hope people listen because it really is painful. For those of you who carry the weight of sin on your shoulders, today can be a new beginning. Just run to the cross. The beautiful thing about the cross is that it was there outside Jerusalem on those Roman timbers and on a Friday afternoon in a place and time in history when God died on the cross for your sins. And Jesus paid it all for all of the sins that you would ever commit so that you could be forgiven. Jesus is greater than your sin. He's greater than your biggest mistake. And so for those who turn to the cross, there's no condemnation. Romans 8:1 says this, there's therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. None. No guilt and no shame, just grace. And so if this is you, run to the cross. Turn from your sin. Bring it out into the light. Drop the baggage that you've been carrying at the foot of the cross and marvel at God's love for you.